Welcome back. The 350 Rand Social Relief of Distress grant is being reinstated. But what can you even buy for that amount, especially in these trying times? Well, to discuss the grant, we are joined by Advocate Thuli Madonsela, the University of Stellenbosch's Law Trust Chair in Social Justice, and General Moyo, the Coordinator of the Fight Inequality Alliance in Gauteng. A very good afternoon to you, lady and gent, and thank you so much for joining us here on Upfront. Advocate, I'm going to start with you on this one. 350 Rand relief distress grant that was taken away in April and then brought back again, of course, after many cries that people in this country are suffering and that the COVID-19 pandemic is far from ending. People are losing their jobs. The economy is taking some strain as well. Firstly, I want to ask, was it even a good idea to do away with it in April, given that they've now brought it back?
Thank you, Morena, and good afternoon to everyone. No, it wasn't a good idea to take the grant morally, economically, but more importantly, constitutionally. The grant is not a favor to those who can't afford. It is in compliance with Section 27 of the Constitution, which requires the state to make sure that there's access to several social and economic rights, and those economic rights include access to sufficient food and water and access to social security and social assistance. And you'll know that most of the people had no food and no money because of the lockdown rules, which means it was governments doing that people didn't have income, and therefore it was governments doing that should have made sure that up front there was this compensation strategy, and therefore it was wrong to keep people without money for such a long time. But thank goodness, sense and sensibility prevailed.
General Moyo, the advocate, is saying sense and sensibility has prevailed, that the 350 Rand distress relief grant is back. There are now calls that, in fact, 350 is not enough. Given that the health minister has just resigned because he was involved in a 150 million Rand digital vibes scandal and that they've brought the grant back, some might say that that means the government does actually have money to maybe even up that grant beyond 350. Would you agree?
Yes, I fully agree. Even the government itself did confirm that the food poverty line is around 595. So giving the 350, it shows that the dignity of the poor and the marginalized is not yet been respected and protected in accordance with the constitution of the country. That makes sure that everyone's dignity and the right to have his dignity or her dignity respected and protected is guaranteed. So with this 350 reinstatement, yes, it is a step that it was a step, a positive step that was taken by the state, but bringing back in this format, I don't think the state is moving any further, more especially with the high demand and the high cost of living, which we are now subjected to. I don't think the state is thinking considerably with the realities on the ground.
What is a reasonable amount in, according to the FIA? What would you like to see the people of South Africa who are in distress, who are suffering because of COVID-19, be getting?
I think we agreed as the unemployed, the excluded, and the marginalized communities to say the appropriate research that have been done by many institutions have proven that the amount in terms of the poverty, above poverty line, it can be 1,500 Rand. That can be appropriate to make sure that at least that addresses the need and the essential needs that the marginalized and the poor are facing, more especially during this pandemic life.
Advocate, what do you think was considered by the Department of Social Development, by the President, by the National Coronavirus Command Council, by every power that is in government in bringing back the grant? I mean, I would imagine they were not sitting on social media, for example, Facebook and Twitter and the likes, going, well, people seem to not be happy with the fact that we took away the 350 grant. Let's bring it back for them and, perhaps pacify them. What do you think was considered when they made this decision?
I would say it was representations that were made by NGOs such as the Coalition for the Grants, the Institute for Economic Justice, Colin Coleman's Institute for Economic Justice, and all of the calls that we've all been making, I do think also government has been listening to people, even though they don't listen to social media as senior leaders, but I would assume that they have teams that are harvesting information from all channels to get a sense of what are people saying. But lastly, I want to believe that government considered its moral responsibilities and constitutional responsibilities and realized that they could afford this grant if they shifted the budget and reprioritized it.
You speak about this being unconstitutional. Could you please just elaborate on that, Advocate?
It's unconstitutional to starve people or to allow people to starve by depriving them means to look after themselves or failing to provide them with social security when they can't look after themselves. That's Section 27. I'm not making it up. And of course, people would say Section 27 says this should be done within affordable means. Well, it becomes affordable means when you've looked at the budget in its totality, because the Constitution in Section 237 says we've got to prioritize constitutional responsibilities. So you can't come back to us and say you can't afford the grant when ministers still have these luxurious benefits where they pay practically nothing for rent and all of these other benefits that are there. So before you say it's not affordable, you've got to look at reprioritizing the budget. And I think they've done the right thing. I want to agree with our colleague, though, that this amount, 350, is less than the food poverty line before COVID-19. Even that line, I suspect, is now above 600 Rand. But it really would be a good idea if government were to lift this amount to at least 600 Rand or 595.
General Moyo, I'm a hard-working South African who is tax-paying and is a law-abiding citizen, and I make sure that I get that which I receive by putting in the necessary work. So if now I'm going to see Advocate Thuli Madonsela just sitting at home not working and then expecting, as you put it, 1,500 rands every month for doing nothing, I mean, why? You know, that would be the belief that a lot of South Africans, I think, have, is that this is just an enablement of South Africans by just giving them money that they've not worked hard for.
Yeah, I think that's the narrative that has been created, and that's the same rhetoric that many that are against what we are calling for have been pushing. Because I don't think there can be people that are willing to be sitting back and be fed and be thrown with this 350 Rand every month without having any participation in some form of a work. People do want work, but since the government has been promising about job creation, but we've seen that doesn't work. We talk about 13 million that are currently living in a dire poverty as we speak. And the research have proven that in that 13 million, about 3 million is the kids that are living in that dire situation. So if you look at that statistics and you say those 13 million people, excluding the kids, are people who are not willing to work, are people who are lazy, are people who want to depend on a charity handout? No. People do want jobs, but the state have proven beyond reasonable doubt that it cannot create a meaningful jobs, even if it has to. We've been doing many presentations about how they can create even the climate justice jobs, around what can be done. But in terms of this current response that we are seeing from the state, is the state, as the advocate said, that is the state that is not listening to the people. So if it was the state that was listening to the people, there were many jobs that could have been created and facilitated even by the state. Even communities were going to be part of those job creation as long as it's something that can sustain them. But we are pushing for this because of the failure of the state that have proved beyond reasonable doubt that there cannot be any job created by government, as they've been making any statistics to say we are going to create 500 million jobs, we are going to create so many million jobs, but none of those have ever been implemented. But the number of job losses, the number of retrenchment have been going on and increasing each and every month. So that's why we are saying the 1,500 Rand every month as a living income or a basic guarantee that is guaranteed to everyone. That can be a means and a way of at least dealing with the poverty that we are facing in South Africa. As we know that South Africa is one of the unequal countries in the world.
Advocate, I want to put the same point forward to you, but perhaps phrase it this way. At the core of xenophobia in this country has largely been South Africans saying that foreign nationals are stealing their jobs. Foreign nationals respond to say that, well, the jobs that we are supposedly taking from you are jobs that you feel are below you and jobs that you cannot be doing. And therefore, because we are hungry and we need to be sending money back to our families back home, we will take whatever we get. Now, of course, General Moyo is saying that, the jobs that are available, there's been a promise, at least from government, for jobs, but jobs have not been forthcoming. So how then are we having a situation where South Africans are saying that foreign nationals are taking jobs from them, and yet foreign nationals are saying there are jobs, you just don't want them, and then same South Africans saying that, well, while we wait for you to give us jobs that we feel we are deserving of, give us some money.
Right. I think it's not true that foreign nationals are stealing jobs from South Africans, and it's also not true that South Africans don't want those jobs. I think it is employers who are dividing and ruling, refusing to employ locals because they would like to employ labor that has no voice. Somebody's not going to get into a union. Somebody's not going to assert their rights when they have to work overtime. And I think if we have to tighten that, workers should not fight with each other. I think our employers in South Africa should understand that they're part of the ecosystem. And if they're part of the ecosystem, they should not be part of the problem. But regarding this money and saying people are lazy or are going to be lazy when they're given this money. In South Africa, under apartheid, people were given land. And based on that land today, some of them are not working. And all they do is they leverage that land to rent it, and they get an income from that. Have they become lazy? Some of our children, those of us who are privileged, when they don't have an income, we subsidize them. Does it make them lazy? I just think the things we say about poor people are deplorable, because we know that we would not apply those standards to ourselves, but we apply them to people. And I agree with my colleague, General, that even without the foreigners, we don't have enough jobs. Not just in South Africa. Of course, in South Africa, it's catastrophic, the absence of jobs. But even in other countries, with the 4IR, some jobs have diminished. And therefore, that's why the whole world is looking at the basic income grant. And that's the insurance we have to pay for peace, by making sure that no one is left behind. And I want to agree with my colleague General also that if we do want those who get the basic income grant or who are getting the distress grant to contribute to society, we could ask them for 1 day in a week or 1 day in a month to contribute to some community work scheme.
General, you mentioned a point about how about 3 million children in this country are suffering, and that this relief grant would go a long way to assisting, and that it is necessary and that it should not even have a deadline, that it must continue, because clearly with this inability for government to provide jobs as they've continued to promise, the least they could do at least is to alleviate poverty by giving a grant. So then my question becomes to you, would you not say that then instead of maybe giving this grant, why not, instead of taking an animal to go drink, why not just help them to fish? Or instead of giving a person a fish, why not help them to fish?
Thanks for that question. I think that's what we've been advocating for, to say this shortcut that the state is taking in terms of teaching people how to fry a fish rather than assisting them how to catch a fish is not helping. So we are not saying the basic income guarantee is a silver bullet that will solve all the miseries that the poor and the marginalized have been subjected to for many years. What we are saying is that for in case that the state, as it has proven beyond reasonable doubt, that it cannot feed its own community, which is a constitutional obligation, as the advocate indicated earlier, that the state got that obligation to make sure that there's no one that will go to bed hungry, no one will be actually forced to live a life where he cannot even take care of himself in terms of feeding themselves. So that's the constitutional obligation, I think. We are talking on those bases to say those obligations should be the mandate of the state to make sure that it cater for those people. And that 13 million that I'm referring to should not be people that are neglected or have been seen as the people who don't want to work, who are people who are relying or waiting for the handout. That's not the truth. And that narrative should also be corrected to say people are demanding what is their constitutional right, and they want to hold the state into the constitutional obligation that the state has, which is guaranteed rights. So in that, we don't see this as another way of creating an easy way of like teaching people how to fry a fish rather than catching a fish. Because if people have got a financial or economical freedom, they can be able to be flexible in terms of how they save, how they create their own small jobs, how they can create those community cooperatives and so forth. But we've seen with those institutions like that are meant to assist financially, to assist those community initiatives, they have never come forth in terms of their obligations. So if community have their own financial independence, they can be able to create themselves sustainable opportunities that can at least take them to another level of their lives. So what we are saying is that if government gives this BIG of 1,500 rand per month, then it will open that opportunity for communities to be able to explore many avenues that can be there, that can make them able them to make sure that they can catch a fish rather than frying a fish.
I want to stay with you, General Moyo. People that are also part of these communities you speak of are permanent refugees who are eligible to receive this grant because they do have the special permits. Again, it takes me back to the discussion about xenophobia. This could still, in this country, knowing how things have happened since about 2008, could spark that outcry from South Africans that, but now people that are coming from Lesotho, Eswatini, Zimbabwe and the likes are now eligible to get grants that, in their words would probably be, we deserve. What then do you say to that?
I think those are the very same rhetoric and the backwards thinking that we've been pushing against to say, we are all faced by corona, and corona knows no border, knows no color. So what we are talking about, and other maybe countries are also talking about, it's a universal basic income guarantee. But in this instance, whereby we are pushing for this social distress relief grants, it's a grant that should be guaranteed to everyone and to anyone that found in that situation. Like the very same migrants that are here in South Africa should fully qualify for it because they are faced by corona. If they are infected by this COVID, I will be exposed myself, even if I'm a South African or I'm not. So this is about taking care of everyone and fighting the pandemic together. The issue of xenophobia, we've seen when the first outbreak started, even in 2018. It was because of the very same rhetoric that are shared by regular state officials, and some of those rhetoric ended up sparking some of those things. So in the community levels, there are no such thing that we don't want to see a Lesotho nationals getting or qualifying for this, or Mozambican qualifying for this. There is that unity from below. But once the officials and the politicians start to trigger those such narratives, then they start to spark all of those things. We've seen the state was pushed by this so-called unrest that happened a couple of weeks back. We didn't anticipate for such things. We didn't want to see such things. But the state is how they get to pay attention to certain relevant issues when such things happen. So they even managed to spark some of those things by pushing those narratives and propaganda, which start to cause those divisions and to cause those tensions within communities. But communities from below and on the ground are willing to get what they can share together. There's no such thing as South Africans as xenophobic, but there are elements of people that are promulgating and pushing those narratives.
Professor, I want to leave this with you now. Obviously, the General saying that we're not saying that we want the government to feed people forever. We want the government to help people get on their feet so that they can sustain themselves. Now, he's also saying that the government has proven that they've just failed on a number of things. Most recently, with the unrest, which a lot of people are saying that was really fueled by people who are hungry and people who are desperate. Now, this 350 Rand grant is not going to be happening forever. Do you feel that the government has the capacity to ensure that they put systems in place, that when they do take the grant away again, that they have equipped South Africans and even permanent refugees to sustain themselves and to look after themselves?
I do think that the government is beginning to listen to civil society, because we don't put people in government because they have all of the answers. And I do think that they are listening. And you're right that should the grant be taken away, there should be a system of self-sustainability that is given to the communities. And I do want to endorse the idea that it's not the government's job to give people jobs. It's the government's job to create conditions that make it possible for people to create jobs for themselves. And one of the mistakes of post-apartheid governments is that they focused on government creating jobs. Government should not create the jobs itself. It should help people to create the jobs. And if it does so, then people create jobs for themselves, self-employment, and they'll create jobs for others. There'll never be a time when we will not need this grant. That's why universally everyone is calling for the basic income grant. What will happen is that if government changes its economic policy, its growth strategy, and does not do things as it has done them in the last 27 years, then there will be less people that need social assistance. So those of us who are arguing for the basic income grant, we're arguing for it to be here forever. But the strategy should be to make sure that most people have other means for generating their own income, generating their own wealth, generating their own food security, and being sustainable, so that a few need social assistance from government.
Advocate, thank you very much for that point and many that you've made. And I want to thank you as well, General Moyo, of course, for your contribution here on Upfront. That is, of course, General Moyo, who is, of course, the coordinator of the Gauteng FIA, and Advocate Thuli Madonsela, who is the chairperson of the Social Injustice at the Stellenbosch University.